Hello, listeners, and welcome to this mini-series on the Church of Jesus Christ Forever, also known as Perfect Church. This small church house in Illinois may not boast high numbers, but what it does do is inflict high levels of trauma. Through family separation and twisted scripture, Perfect Church was a breeding ground for child abuse. Jesse was no exception to this, as he was forced to live with other members of the church, separated from his parents and siblings, left to endure heinous environments and perpetrators who claim to be absolutely and completely perfect. This is a coming-of-age cautionary tale of one person's traumatic childhood through to taking desperate measures just to survive. There are many lessons to take from Jesse's story, and I know that it will be validating and invaluable to some of the listeners. Part 1 will focus on Jesse's childhood inside the Church of Jesus Christ Forever, with Part 2 looking at Jesse's teenage years in the group and multiple attempts to escape, finishing on Part 3, a rebirth after taking drastic action to leave behind an abusive life, with no money, no place to live, or any means of travel. Jesse ends on how he has managed to create a beautiful life for himself away from religious abuse. Some wording in this episode has been muted due to its derogatory nature, and please note that there is a trigger warning of potentially offensive language and child abuse. If you would like to listen to this episode or any future episodes in full, ad-free, with early access, you can sign up at patreon.com/thecultvault to support the show from as little as £1 a month. And now, here is Jesse.
So hello, Jesse, and welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today to bring something to myself and the listeners that has not been covered on the show before. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yes, hi Casey. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Jesse Morris, and I'm originally from a very small town in northern Illinois, about 4,000 people. I live in Oregon now, in the state of Oregon, in Portland, and with my wife of 5 years and our dog named Squirrel.
Squirrels are usually what dogs chase after.
Yes. Squirrel acts like a squirrel. One day I will let her catch a squirrel, but I think that my wife would have my head if I did that.
So what is the name of the group that we're going to be looking at today? It's one that we haven't covered. It was new to me once you reached out to me. Would that be because this is a small church located in the small town of Illinois that you grew up in?
Yes, the church's name is the Church of Jesus Christ Forever. It is, there are about 50 people maybe. At different points in time, there were a few more, a few less, but it's about 50 right now. And it was started in the late 60s or early 70s as a Bible study. And it sort of kind of morphed into an actual church once it, outgrew the building that they were using as a Bible study. They are they're very legalistic. It's a Christian non-denominational church, and it's very Pentecostal without stating that they're Pentecostal.
The link that you sent me to the church's website, it was called The Perfect Church. So is this a nickname that they've given themselves?
So their website is perfectchurch.com, and they preach perfection. They demand perfection. There's no room for error. They state that they are perfect right now. In the flesh, walking around, they are perfect. They do not sin. They don't have bad thoughts, evil thoughts. That's who they are. That's something that they have preached since I was a kid, since I was a baby. It was always something that was forced on us.
The group started as a Bible study. Is it now taking place in a church house? Was there like a collection thrown together to buy a building where the church would meet and practice? What does that look like?
So the church started as a Bible study in a farmhouse. And, anytime that we would have a guest, which is very, very rare, they would explain, this is what happened to the church, and this is how we came to be, and God gave us this building. So it started as a Bible study, and the female pastor, which was very controversial back in the 70s and early 80s, there wasn't such a thing as a female pastor. So there was already a lot of controversy with the church. The female pastor stated that she was given a church and supernaturally, and that's how it began. They were just given a church. There wasn't, to my knowledge, there was not a collection to build the church, although all of the parents put in the work to actually make this church an actual church. It was just a building. They dedicated their own time, and I would imagine some level of funds were donated, but I don't know anything offhand. The specific church that I grew up in, again, was Christian non-denominational, and so we were, there's no drinking, there's no premarital anything, there's no, it's very, very, very limited. So, Matthew 5:48 was the verse that we grew up on. Be therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. It was only the King James Version Bible. Wow. There was nothing else that we would read. I remember actually one time the pastor throwing away a Catholic Bible that I had found because it was, sacrilegious. It was an evil Bible.
And this church was started by a woman, or led by a woman, in the 70s and 80s. Is it still in female leadership, as far as you're aware?
It was started as a church, or by a female pastor, and she married the assistant pastor, who is where it gets fun, who was about 30 years her junior, and they were married for about a year, and she passed away, and he took over. So he is the current pastor.
That's so interesting. That's like Lois Roden with the Branch Davidians, but then kind of the other way, and how David Koresh got in with this older woman and basically took over from under her feet.
Yes. So the pastor that is the pastor now was married to this woman that was, 30, 40 years older than him. I don't know the exact number, but they were married for about a year. And my understanding is that everything that she had went to him. And she did not live in poverty. It's a bit odd.
In some parts of America, there's a church for every 50 people. There must have been a niche of opening a space, something that was missing from the church houses and buildings that were already in operation in Illinois, for this one to attract so much attention. Or was it just because of where it was situated or what the pastor was preaching?
So the town that I grew up in was 4,000 people, and there are plenty of churches in the actual town, but this was the only one that was led by a woman. And back in the 70s, that was a really big deal. In a very conservative state, for a church to be led by a woman was essentially went against the Bible, if you wanted to look at it that way. And so the church from the very start was involved in controversy. And the church was already extreme enough in regards to their beliefs in preaching perfection and demanding it, how secluded they were. And so everyone knew us growing up as we were called the cult. Everyone in this tiny town, everyone knew us. We were known as the cult of Oregon. So the town that I grew up in is named Oregon, Illinois. And we were the cult of Oregon. And to this day, everyone knows the church. Earlier this year, there was a bit of controversy, and it kind of raised awareness again about this church. And so everyone in town knows of this church, as well as the police. We, a lot of us who are ex-members, filed police charges.
It's interesting what you said about the female leadership being controversial, but also quite attractive in the 70s, because we know from a lot of the stuff that's been covered on the show at this point that the feminist movement was really on the rise in the 70s. The counterculture really fed into that. So perhaps if there was ever going to be a time where female leadership would be something sought after by practicing Christians, maybe the 70s would have been it, up until, I would hope now, as I feel like, I hope that we're a bit more progressive in this day and age, although I do doubt that after the amount of interviews I've done.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. The 70s was the time where women were finally being given a voice. However, we're talking about a very conservative state, and that was still very controversial. I mean, she was the only female pastor in town, the only person in leadership, and she was looked down on. So there wasn't any acceptance of her at all. And maybe in another state, if we're in California or possibly East Coast somewhere, sure, I think that would have, the town would have been a little bit more accepting. But in Illinois, there's not a chance.
It sounds like it could be the perfect setup almost for other practicing Christians to look at the perfect church and say, these people are heretics, they have a female leader. But in turn, perfect ammunition for her as a leader to say, these people don't have the truth. The only people that have the truth are us, because I'm in charge and nobody else has a female leader.
Yes. And, a lot of the parents a lot of the parents that are there today are ones that actually founded the church. I mean, my parents were one of the very first members of the church. And the female pastor took a lot of the parents in, and they came from varying backgrounds. A lot of them had abuse in their pasts, and I think a lot of them were looking for answers. And along comes this very maternal figure who claims to have all the answers and be led of God, and this is exactly what they were looking for. Didn't matter if what she was preaching was absurd. She claimed to have the answers, and she treated them like children, like her own children, and that's what they wanted.
When you said before that your church was known as the cult of Illinois, did you get told that as a child growing up? Was that something you would hear?
In school, a lot of us were harassed by students. We were questioned by other students, and rumors are just rumors. And so we'd have some kids walk up to us and say, hey, we peeked in the church's windows and we saw you all in robes. And that never happened, ever. There were no sacrifices. There were no, we weren't dancing in robes. Really was the theology and what happened behind closed doors where no one could see. But we were definitely harassed as children growing up in this very small town.
So it wasn't one of these moments for you, sort of after you've left the group or years later, where you come across the word cult and some varying definitions of it, and you think, oh my goodness, that's what happened to me, which is often what we hear on the show. You were aware of this group being labeled that way years before you were able to escape.
Yeah, I was aware of that, but I always had to refute it, because as growing up and being so brainwashed and being told like, no, we're not a cult. We have these are our beliefs, and this is what God has shown us. And, we've been chosen by God to be the people. Cult was just a very nasty word. And so we would constantly just refute it in school. I never believed that we were a cult growing up, ever. And I would actually I would read or hear about other things that were happening to people or in churches, and I'd feel sorry for them, not realizing that this was exactly what was happening here.
Well, now that you have answered a barrage of my questions through my pure interest and intrigue around some of the information that you've given us so far, I'd like to hand everything over to you and just ask you how your parents became involved. What were they like? What changed after they joined and you being born, and really just paint that whole picture for us on how you came to be involved in the perfect church.
This would literally take hours, and it is a web of ins and outs of people being married and divorced and children being handed over. Is so weird. However, in the briefest way possible, my mom was a stewardess based in Hawaii, and she met a man, married him, had children. They moved to Illinois and began attending a Bible study where her husband essentially became infatuated with the female leader of the Bible study. And I've spoken to several people And so I won't just say that this is one person that is passed this information along. Several people have stated that the pastor claimed in the 80s to be the physical reincarnation of Christ, or the image of Christ in the flesh, and that the female Bible lead was the mother of Jesus, or some important historical figure, religious figure, and they needed to start a relationship together, regardless of whether the male was married to my mom. And so because they were taught to just accept whatever happened, whatever was stated by the leaders, my mom accepted that this man, her husband, and this female pastor were joined by God. So whatever happened, happened. So the pastor ended up divorcing my mom. My mom's children were raised by someone else, and the pastor became involved in a physical relationship with when I say the pastor, I mean this male. Let's call him Kali, because that's what his name is. Kali became physically involved with Rose, the female leader of this Bible study. And then they together formed the church. And he became the assistant pastor while she took the lead as the female pastor. And then they were married in the early 90s. So my mom was actually married to the current pastor. And I have 2 sisters and 1 brother that they're half sisters, but their dad is the current pastor.
Your dad is the current pastor?
Oh, no, thankfully, no. No. When my mom got divorced, she married, there was an arranged marriage in the church, and my older brother was born, and he realized that he was now married, that he had this kid, and he was new to the church, and like, what the heck is happening? How did this happen so fast? And so he left the church. And then my mom somehow became involved with my dad. He was also at the church, in the church. I don't know the circumstances. My understanding is that it was possibly another arranged marriage. Yes. So my dad is not the pastor.
So you have 2 siblings. One of them is fathered by the current leader of the church. One is fathered by a person that your mother had an arranged marriage with, and you are a 3rd child with a 3rd different father who was also involved in the church.
I actually have 7 siblings.
Whoa, okay. Oh my goodness.
So my mom's first marriage, she had 3 kids with the pastor.
Right.
Got a divorce, married another guy. My mom had 1 kid with him. They divorced and he fled the church. My mom married my dad and had 4 kids. So there are 8 of us total.
Okay, well, 4 kids with your father sounds
Yep.
like they must have had a longer relationship. Was this something that worked out for your mom? Did she find someone that would take care of her?
My parents were married for 24 years, and in 2008, my dad passed away of a heart attack.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear that. I don't know what your relationship was like with your parents at that point.
It was on the rocks.
So there was no chance for reconciliation after the events that took place.
No. And I was still in the church when my dad passed away. But I just wasn't on the greatest terms with him. At that point, I was a bit more rebellious in regards to wanting to stay in the church. And actually, to answer part of your other question, I was actually born in the church. So when I was born, the church was in full swing. So all I had ever known was the church. I spent 22 years in the church, and I'm 35 now.
Well, I really am sorry to hear, Jesse, that you didn't get the opportunity to have one of these repairing experiences with your father. I don't know if you've had that opportunity with your mum since your father's passed away. No.
My mom has, in all respects, she's disowned me for not being part of the church, for what has happened earlier this year with filing charges.
Okay.
The church doesn't like me very much right now.
That's really difficult. That's really difficult. There are a lot of moving parts here, which you mentioned at the
many of them.
start. But can you try and paint a picture for us of what things were like for you, your earliest memories in terms of being a part of the church?
When I was younger, life was good. I mean, up until the age of 6, and I only remember a little bit, I feel like life was pretty good. I had a relatively normal life. I remember, going to church services, and we all but worshiped the female pastor. She was everyone's, adopted mom. And the church has a style of operation where when a church service begins, anyone and everyone can get up and say something. It's the pastor doesn't actually stand at the pulpit. They believe that if during the week you are faithful to God by reading the Bible and praying, that God will be faithful to you and give you a word or something in the Bible, a scripture. And so on Sunday, you come to church prepared with what God gave you. So the church service kind of opens with someone praying, and then everyone gets up at different points and kind of preaches. So as I was growing up, I remember wanting to give something to this female pastor. Like, we revered her quite a bit. And so when she passed away when I was 6, I believe in 1992 or 93, it was a very tragic moment for the church. I remembered hearing that she was supposed to raise from the dead. So we were told, first of all, we were told that she was never going to die, that she was perfect. And they actually state that on their website, that I have screenshots. Rose can never die. Well, then she died. So figure that one out. So when that happened, they come up with something like, oh, God showed us that she was going to die, but just so that she can be raised from the dead. So 3 days after she died, I remember being in the church building, and we were, it was late at night, and we were viewing her body, and we were waiting for her to raise from the dead. As a 6-year-old, my dad put me on his shoulders so I can see above everyone else and look at her body, waiting for her to raise from the dead. That was back in, 93. It's 2022, and she's still dead. So I honestly don't know how you can come up with something biblically to state that she's going to be raised. She's sitting in a grave right now. So life changed after she passed away. A lot of the joy of life seemed to be sucked out of us. Life became harsher. We were told that we could no longer celebrate birthdays. I never once celebrated Christmas growing up. On Christmas Day, we would always gather as a church to have a meal, but there was never any presents or Christmas trees or lights or whatever. And that's fine. That didn't necessarily matter, but our life was different from a lot of people that I grew up with in school. And so life became harsh, and there are a lot more punishments for different things that we did. We were never allowed to date. And I cannot imagine what would have happened if we came home from school one day and said, hey, I have a romantic interest. It would have been unthinkable. I don't remember one person dating when we were in school. And frankly, there probably would have been some level of punishment if we had come home and stated a romantic interest, and it would have been harsh. So as I was growing up, the church is I remember the church being known for their meetings. So any time I was in trouble I don't necessarily have a filter. So when I say things, I don't get to like think them through. I just kind of say them, and that would get me in trouble a lot. So they would always bring up James 3, the chapter about the tongue and how I have a big mouth, or they would call me a glutton because I had one too many pancakes, or just very demeaning words that were associated with me. And they would hold meetings anytime they wanted to talk about something serious. And it was usually, they used a part of the Bible where it said, if your brother offend you, go to him separately. If he continues to offend you, take 2 or 3, and then, bring him before the church. So that's what they would do. It was a system that they had. And it was usually, it started off with a pastor or, an elder or someone. And then they would usually bring like 2 or 3 people out to talk to me. And they were not good talks. They were terrible. There was one meeting late at night where they wanted to scare me, and they told me that when I was born, I looked like Frankenstein. They said the word monster was used. I don't know why they thought that would scare me into believing God a little bit better. I don't know. But meeting after meeting after meeting where my future was preached. I was told that I would rape a retarded girl, quote unquote. I was going to rape a retarded girl. And just so anyone who is listening knows, I have not raped a retarded girl. So there's that. I was told that just so many things about my future, that I was going to go to hell, that I was going to get fat, that just all these things to create fear, and they were very demoralizing as I was growing up. I believe so. My family was treated much different than a lot of the other families in the church. My personal belief is that it is because my mom was married to the pastor, and they got a divorce, and my mom decided to remain in the church and under the thumb of the pastor, and so we were always treated differently. We were treated much worse, and we could never quite make it to whatever, to the standards. We could never quite meet the standards that the church demanded. And again, Matthew 5:38 was the church, the verse that the church lived by, and that's, be perfect. There wasn't room for error. There was no room. And if we did something, we were punished severely. When I was 13, my parents visited Hawaii, and 13 was a very influential part of my life in regards to what it did to me. I was handed over to a family in the church, and I don't recall a conversation that happened about what was and what was not allowed. Obviously, those happened behind the scenes, but my understanding is that this family could do whatever they wanted to me. They were part of the church and do whatever they needed to do. And so life in this house was fine. When my parents were in Hawaii, it started off normally. And then I said something that the family didn't like. I remember one day asking about dessert. If something as small as this, I asked about dessert. Is there going to be dessert after dinner? And someone said no. And I expressed my disappointment. And I was later pulled aside and told that I was ungrateful, that I was selfish, and I believe that I was given a bar of soap my mouth was washed out with a bar of soap. And then I was told that from here on out, every time I said something or did something that these parents didn't like, something would be taken away from me. And this family lived in a very large house in the countryside. It was winter, and I was living in the basement in a room that was quite unfinished. So it was a very large basement. It was cold. So I started off in a bed with a blanket and sheets and everything. And every time I did something wrong, something was taken away. So they took my blanket away. They took my pillow. They took my bed. And so finally I ended up sleeping on an area rug on the floor. And then they started taking my clothes. And I remember huddling at night, just in the fetal position every night, just hugging myself for warmth, just trying to make it through another night. And it was freezing. And then one day they moved me off of the carpet and they moved me onto a cement floor. And that was the next punishment. And so I slept every night on the cement floor in my underwear, hugging myself for warmth, just trying to make it until the morning to where I could get up and be able to put my clothes on. And then I started, I would wake up in the middle of the night and steal a blanket and a pillow to try to just try to stay warm. And this happened for weeks. And also at this house, so the church believes very strongly in fasting. So no food, only water. That's a true fast according to them. And there isn't a fast from music. There's not a fast from reading books. This is the only fast that there is. And so they believe that fasting is the most important way to rid yourself of evil. It is the body's greatest sacrifice. You're denying what your body needs. And so if you weren't fasting when you're doing something wrong, then you were content to continue sinning. Yeah. So I was, through my life in the church, I don't remember the number of times that I was forced to fast. I never fasted willingly. So in that moment, so really, it's not really fasting. I was starved. If I'm not agreeing to fast and someone's pressuring me into fasting, I was starved. A lot of the times I would, after enough peer pressure and harassment by members of the church, I would grudgingly say yes to kind of like end the meeting that we're in, or to, if I agreed, it was going to make things better. And so I agreed to fast, but I was also known as the person who would cheat on my fasts. And I actually am pretty proud of that. I'll hold that distinction. I would fast, which means, I ended up in much worse trouble. And that's something that I was always in trouble because of, cheating on my fasts. So I was constantly monitored. I was never allowed to be by myself. And so when I was staying at this family's house at the age of 13, I was cheating on all my fasts. So one day I was so hungry that the wife of this family, Ruth, made me stand in the living room while she went to the bathroom, and they put some chocolates out on the table. And that was their mistake. That was something they should never have done, because what do you think I'm going to do? You're starving me, and here's food sitting on the table, and I'm not being monitored. So I grabbed the food. Well, then the daughter sitting in the next room saw me and told her mom when she got out of the bathroom, and I was punished in a way that I'd never been punished before. I was so used to them taking something from me when I was punished that that night they gave me what I wanted. When it was time for bed, all the kids in this family went to bed, and I asked if I can go to bed, and the parents said no, and they sat me in the kitchen, and they pulled out a pan of fudge from the refrigerator and told me that because I have this gluttony of stealing this chocolate, they're going to make me eat the fudge. And these parents were, there's no other word to use. They were so stupid, and I know that's I guess it's not a very nice word to use, but really it wasn't about the chocolate. And they thought it was about the chocolate. This is about food. This is about survival. I needed food. I was being starved. But in their mind, I took this chocolate because I was a glutton, because I had a problem with sweets. And so they made me eat the pan of fudge. And the first few bites, it's fine. You're finally giving me what I want. Like, this is great. I finally get to eat. And I was taught to never question them. You don't question anything that they say. Like, they are the voice of God. So I ate the fudge. And then I got to a point where I couldn't eat anymore. And I stated, like, hey, I'm done. I'm finished. I can't eat more. And they told me to continue eating. So I continued eating, and I ended up throwing up I vomited in a bowl. And they told me then that I was either going to drink my throw up, or they grabbed a glass of water with sugar in it, and with a ton of sugar. And they told me that I was going to drink the glass of sugar. That was my choice. And in my mind, this fudge was sugar. That's all I saw was sugar. So given the choice of drinking the glass of water of sugar, I couldn't do it. And so I was forced to drink my vomit. And I don't know that they realized that the place they'd brought me to. I don't think that they thought I was going to drink my vomit, but I couldn't drink that glass of sugar. And they were horrified, and I saw the look on their face, and this is what they brought me to. And so I drank my vomit. And I don't remember what else happened that night. I mean, I know that I was crying, and I was begging for them to not make me eat any more fudge. I was sobbing, and they continued forcing me to eat it. So the next 3 days, they put me on nothing but sugar. So pancakes loaded with syrup and chocolate chips and those disgusting marshmallow peeps and licorice. And I remember having to go to another member's house, and these parents told this, this other church member, Jesse has to eat this, and they handed him a packet of fudge, like licorice sticks. And so that night I was forced to eat this fudge. So 3 days passed of eating nothing but sugar. And I mean, I could have been a diabetic. I could have ended up in the hospital. I was not allowed anything normal. So, so one morning I woke up, the third day I woke up, and was sitting at the breakfast table with his family. And the husband started questioning me about how I slept. And obviously I slept terrible. And he essentially came to the point where he told me he had snuck downstairs and saw me sleeping with a pillow and a blanket when I was supposed to be sleeping on the cement floor, and I wasn't going to admit it. And so he yelled at me. He threw his plate down on the table and said, "That's enough. You're leaving my house, and I'm taking you somewhere, and you're never going to see your parents again. And you don't get to see your parents. Like, this is enough. This is the last straw. You're going to lie about how you were sleeping." And actually and he said, "But first you're going to go to your parents' house and you're going to say goodbye to them." And that's when I knew that I beat them. All of their tactics, none of their tactics were working at this house. The starvation, the chocolate, the sweets, and the sleeping on the floor, and they were done with me. And I knew that they were out of things to do, out of punishment, since they brought me back to my family's house. But I remember, even still believing in the church in that moment, I remember knowing and stating, deciding inside myself that I allowed these people to do whatever they wanted to me. I was completely vulnerable. They could have chopped my foot off. And actually there was one point where they handed me a knife and told me that if my hand offend me, cut it off. And I started sawing at my finger. And then they grabbed the knife from me. But, I knew that I could never let someone do that to me again. Even as a 13-year-old, even if I had still decided to believe in the church, I was not going to allow someone to do that. So I decided that as a 13-year-old, that no one could ever treat me like that again. And unfortunately, they did.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series on the Church of Jesus Christ Forever, also known as the Perfect Church. If you would like to listen to this episode or any future episodes in full, ad-free with early access, you can sign up at patreon.com/thecultvault to support the show from as little as £1 a month. To get in touch, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram at cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.